Good evening, my friends, and welcome back to Horror Whispers. Tonight we share 10 haunted trucker tales from Devil's Tower roots. If you are new here, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling story. Now let's begin. My name is Mark Holden. I'm 46 years old, and for the last 22 of those years I've been a long-haul trucker. I've seen this country through the panoramic view of a Freightliner windshield. From the sun-scorched asphalt of I-10 in Arizona to the icy passes of the Rockies in January. I've dealt with blown tires, engine failures, blizzards that came out of nowhere, and drivers who seem to have gotten their licenses from a cereal box. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, and what my rig's diagnostic computer tells me. I don't believe in ghosts. At least I didn't. My run that week was a familiar one. Hauling machine parts from Denver up to Billings, Montana. It's a route I've done 100 times, a straight shot up I-25, then cutting across Wyoming. The Wyoming leg is the part that gets to you. The sky is so big it feels like it's trying to swallow you. And the land is so empty you start to feel like the last man on Earth. On this particular trip, I was running a little behind schedule. A delay at the depot in Denver had set me back a few hours, which meant I'd be hitting the loneliest stretch of the route, the roads around Devil's Tower, well after midnight. I didn't mind. Night driving has a certain peace to it. The CB radio is quieter, the four-wheelers are mostly off the road, and it's just you, your rig, and the endless ribbon of highway unfolding in your headlights. That night the sky was crystal clear. A deep, star-dusted black that you only get out in the high plains, far from any city glow. The moon was a sliver, offering just enough light to turn the rolling hills into dark, sleeping beasts on either side of the road. And there in the distance was the tower. You can't miss it. Even from 50 miles away, Devil's Tower is an unnerving presence on the horizon. It doesn't look like a mountain, it looks like something that was clawed up from the earth by a colossal hand. During the day, it's impressive. At night, it's a solid block of pure blackness, a void in the star field. The Lakota call it Mato Tipala, Bear Lodge. They say it's a sacred place. Driving past it at night, you can feel that. There's a weight in the air, a stillness that feels ancient and watchful. I was on Wyoming Route 24, a two-lane blacktop that skirts the monument. It was about 2 in the morning. My coffee was still warm in its thermos, a classic rock station was playing softly on the satellite radio, and my engine was humming its familiar, comforting tune. The world was exactly as it should be. That's when I saw the lights. They appeared far in the distance, a single pair of headlights coming toward me in the opposite lane. It was a welcome sight. Out here, another set of headlights is a brief reminder that you're not entirely alone. I watched them grow steadily larger, a tiny pinprick of light expanding into 2 distinct beams. I did what truckers do, a quick flick of my high beams, a silent hello to a fellow traveler in the night. There was no response. Strange, but not unheard of. As the vehicle got closer, maybe a mile out, the lights began to behave erratically. They flickered. Not like a loose connection, but in a deliberate rhythmic pattern. On, off, on, off. It was a slow, hypnotic pulse. My first thought was that the driver was in trouble, maybe trying to signal for help. I eased my foot off the accelerator, my hand hovering over the CB mic. "Eastbound on 24, you got a copy?" I said into the radio. "Static, any rig on Route 24, come back." More static. The airwaves were dead silent, which was unusual even for this time of night. The lights kept coming and the flickering stopped. Now they were just blazing, unnaturally bright. They were so intense they hurt my eyes, washing out the road ahead and forcing me to squint. It was like staring into the sun. I shielded my eyes with my hand, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This wasn't right. No standard headlights were that powerful. They weren't just illuminating the road, they were consuming it in a blinding white glare. My heart started to pound. This wasn't a signal for help. It felt like a warning, or a threat. The vehicle, whatever it was now only a few hundred yards away. I braced myself for the pass, for the rush of wind that rocks the cab, for the brief glimpse of another driver in another metal box. My rig rumbled on, closing the distance, 50 yards. The light was absolute, a solid wall of white. I couldn't see the shape of the vehicle behind it. I couldn't even see the road. I was driving blind, trusting the painted lines I could no longer see. 20 yards. 10. And then, in the exact instant that the vehicle should have roared past my window, the lights vanished. It wasn't that they were turned off. They ceased to exist. One moment my cab was flooded with a light so bright it felt solid. The next there was only the profound star-dusted darkness of the Wyoming night, broken only by my own headlights cutting a lonely path. There was no sound, no whoosh of a passing car, no rumble of an engine, no gust of wind. The air outside my window was perfectly still. My own engine's hum suddenly seemed deafening in the absolute silence that followed. My breath hitched in my throat. I stomped on the brakes, the air brakes hissing in protest as my 80,000-pound rig slowed, the tires groaning against the asphalt. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the truck shuddering to a halt. I killed the engine. The silence was total. I sat there, my hands shaking, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Could a car have veered off the road? I scanned the darkness to my left. Nothing. Just flat, empty plains stretching out to the horizon. No broken fences, no dust cloud, no trail of destruction. Could they have turned down a side road? I knew this route like the back of my hand. There were no side roads for another 10 miles. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight from the door pocket, my hand fumbling with the switch. I clicked it on, its powerful beam cutting a clean circle in the night. I opened the heavy door of my cab and stepped out onto the gravel. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. I walked to the edge of the road, my boots crunching on the loose stones. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the opposite side of the highway, then across the plains beyond. Nothing. The ground was undisturbed. There were no tire tracks leading off the pavement, no sign that any vehicle had been there at all. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just listening. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful whisper that seemed to curl around the distant dark shape of Devil's Tower. A deep, primal fear began to creep up my spine. It was a feeling I hadn't had since I was a kid, the kind of fear that comes from knowing with absolute certainty that you have just encountered something that does not belong in this world. I scrambled back into my cab, locking the door behind me. I fired up the engine, the familiar roar a small comfort against the oppressive silence outside. I didn't bother trying the CB again. Who would I tell? What would I say? That I'd just seen a ghost? They'd think I was drunk or crazy. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, pushing the speed limit, my eyes glued to my mirrors. The road behind me remained empty, but the feeling of being watched, of having trespassed on some ancient, unseen boundary, stayed with me all the way to Billings. I've driven that route a dozen times since that night. I've done it in daylight and snowstorms and under the same blanket of stars. I've never seen the flickering lights again. But I never drive that stretch of Route 24 without a knot of ice in my stomach. I'm a practical man, but some things can't be explained by logic or diagnostics. Some things you just have to accept. Out there, in the shadow of the tower, you are not alone. And sometimes the things that travel the night with you have no intention of letting you see who or what is behind the wheel. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale. My name is Angela Brooks. I'm 33 and I've been driving a big rig for about 5 years now. I got into it after a messy divorce left me with a pile of debt and a need to just go. Driving gave me that. It's a tough job, especially for a woman. You get the looks, the comments on the CB, the skepticism from the old-timers, but I'm good at it. I'm reliable, I'm safe, and I can back a 53-foot trailer into a spot you'd think was painted on. The road is my office, and my Kenworth is my home. But after one particular run through Wyoming, I started to feel like I wasn't always the only one in it. The load was time-sensitive. Fresh produce from California heading to a distribution center in South Dakota. That means no long stops, just fuel, coffee, and go. I was pushing through the last leg of the trip, cutting across northeastern Wyoming as a dreary late autumn dusk settled over the plains. A cold, persistent drizzle was falling, the kind that isn't heavy enough to need full-speed wipers but constant enough to smear the world into a watercolor of grays and browns. My enemy on this run was fatigue. It was creeping into my bones, making my eyelids feel like they were lined with lead. I had the radio cranked up, a podcast about true crime blaring through the speakers, anything to keep my mind engaged. The landscape wasn't helping. It was mile after mile of empty rolling hills, the color of wet straw. And looming to my left, shrouded in mist and low-hanging clouds, was Devil's Tower. Even in the gloomy weather, the thing had a presence. It felt watchful. The local radio stations were full of ads for the tourist traps around it, but they also played PSAS from the Park Service, reminding people that it's a sacred site for multiple Native American tribes. They asked visitors to be respectful. Driving past it, you understood why. It felt less like a tourist attraction and more like a cathedral built by nature itself. I was about 10 miles past the main turnoff for the monument, the rain starting to come down a little harder, when I saw her. She was standing on the right shoulder of the road just at the edge of my headlight beams. A hitchhiker. My first reaction was a jolt of adrenaline, the kind you get when you see something unexpected on a long, monotonous drive. My second was confusion. She was just a silhouette at first, but as I got closer, details started to emerge. She was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a simple, light-colored dress that looked like something out of an old photograph. It was completely inadequate for the cold, wet weather. Her hair was long and dark, plastered to her head and shoulders by the rain. Company policy is clear. No riders. Ever. It's an insurance nightmare, and you never know who you're picking up. But my heart went out to her. She looked so lost, so vulnerable. A part of me, the part that my mother instilled in me, wanted to pull over. She could get hypothermia out here. There was nothing for miles. I slowed the truck down, my mind wrestling with itself. The podcast hosts were chattering about a cold case from the 80s, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, contemplating picking up a complete stranger on a desolate road at night. It was the opening scene of a horror movie. As I got closer, maybe 100 feet away, a detail snapped me out of my sympathetic trance. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't trying to flag me down. She wasn't holding out her thumb or making eye contact. Her body was angled toward the road, but her head was turned to the left, away from me. Her right arm was raised, her hand pointing rigidly, insistently across the highway. She was pointing directly at Devil's Tower. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal the top of the massive rock formation, its fluted columns disappearing into the dark gray sky. The woman was pointing at it with an expression that my headlights illuminated for just a second, but that I will never forget. It was a look of pure, undiluted terror. Her eyes were wide, her mouth a silent O of horror. She wasn't asking for a ride. She was trying to show me something, or warn me about something. A chill, colder than the autumn rain, shot through me. It was a primal, instinctual feeling of wrongness. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to get away. The debate in my head was over. My foot, which had been hovering over the brake, slammed down on the accelerator. The Kenworth's big diesel engine roared, and the truck surged forward. I kept my eyes locked on her as I passed. She didn't move. She didn't turn her head. She just stood there, soaked and shivering, pointing at the dark, brooding tower in the distance. The second I was past her, my eyes darted to my passenger side mirror. I needed to see her, to confirm that she was real, that my tired mind wasn't just playing tricks on me. The mirror showed me the empty, rain-slicked road. She was gone. There was nowhere she could have gone. To my right was a steep, muddy ditch and then a barbed wire fence. To my left was the other lane of the highway. She couldn't have run, not that fast. She had simply vanished from the spot where she had been standing a heartbeat before. No way, I whispered to the empty cab. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I fumbled for the CB mic, my hand shaking. Westbound on, I think it's 14, I stammered, my voice sounding thin and reedy. Did anyone just see a woman on the side of the road? A hitchhiker? A voice, crackly with static, came back after a moment. Negative, westbound. Road's been empty for the last 20 miles. You all right over there? Yeah, I lied, my voice trembling. Yeah, I'm fine. Must have been a trick of the light. Watch yourself, the voice crackled back. That place plays tricks on you. The tower. It doesn't like to be disturbed. I didn't answer. I put the mic back in its holder and focused on driving, my knuckles white on the wheel. The true crime podcast was still playing, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could see was the woman's terrified face, her finger pointing at that colossal stone pillar. I drove for another hour before I felt safe enough to pull into a brightly lit truck stop. I sat in my cab for a long time, the engine idling, just trying to get my breathing back to normal. I bought the biggest coffee they had and looked up local legends for that area on my phone. It didn't take long to find her. The stories varied, but the core was the same. A vanishing hitchhiker, a young woman in old-fashioned clothes, seen on the roads near Devil's Tower. Some legends said she was the ghost of a pioneer girl who got lost in a blizzard. Others claimed she was a Native American spirit, a guardian of the tower, warning travelers who got too close. Every version of the story mentioned her terrified expression and the way she always pointed at the tower. I finished my coffee, the warmth doing little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my soul. I still had a job to do, produce to deliver. But as I pulled back onto the interstate, I made a promise to myself. I would never again take a route that led me into the shadow of Devil's Tower. Some places hold on to their stories, and some stories are walking the roads at night, forever pointing at the source of their fear. I'm just a truck driver. I've got no business getting involved in the affairs of ghosts. Call me Denny. I'm 52 and I've been driving since I was old enough to see over the dash of my daddy's Peterbilt. I'm what you'd call a lifer. This isn't a job to me, it's who I am. I've got more miles in reverse than most people have going forward. I'm a man of simple tastes and firm beliefs. I believe in a well-maintained engine, the power of a good cup of black coffee, and the undeniable fact that anything that seems supernatural is just something you haven't found the logical explanation for yet. I've heard all the ghost stories at the truck stops, the tales of phantom headlights and spectral hitchhikers. I always just chuckled and shook my head. Fatigue, I'd say. Loneliness and an overactive imagination. Then I took a load of cattle feed to Hewlett, Wyoming. The route took me right past Devil's Tower. I'd seen it before, of course. It's a hell of a thing to see. But this trip was different. I was running late, pushing to make my delivery window, which meant I'd be on the darkest, most isolated part of the journey right around midnight. The moon was a black hole in the sky, a new moon, so the only light came from my headlights and the blanket of stars that looked like spilled salt on black velvet. The air was still and cold. I had my windows down a crack and the scent of sagebrush was sharp and clean. It was dead, quiet, no other trucks, no cars, just the low thrum of my Cummins engine. It was peaceful, the kind of night that reminds you why you do this job. The road unspooled before me, a gray path through an ocean of black. I glanced at the clock on my dash, 11:59 p.m. As the numbers clicked over to 12, a flicker of movement in my driver's side mirror caught my eye. I looked again, harder this time. Far behind me, maybe a mile or two back, a set of lights had appeared. No, not a set. Several. It looked like a convoy of 3 or 4 trucks falling into line behind me. My first thought was relief. It was good to have some company. I figured they were other drivers who had been waiting at the last truck stop for a safer time to travel. Maybe they were running together for security, but as I watched them in my mirror, a prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. They were running dark. I don't mean their headlights were dim, I mean they were off. I could see the shapes of the trucks, big boxy silhouettes against the slightly less black horizon, but there were no headlights, no clearance lights, no cab lights. Nothing. They were moving as black silent masses. The only reason I could see them at all was because they were blocking out the stars behind them. What in the hell? I muttered, leaning closer to the mirror. Maybe it was a military convoy running with night vision. I'd seen that before near bases out in the desert. But out here? And they didn't look like military vehicles. They looked like old trucks. The kind of snub-nosed, high cab rigs you saw in the 60s and 70s. They were gaining on me and fast, much faster than a convoy of old heavy trucks should be able to move. My speedometer read a steady 65, the speed limit on this stretch. They were closing the distance as if I were standing still. The unease in my gut tightened into a cold knot of fear. This was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The lead truck was now close enough that I could make out its shape more clearly. It was a cab over, a model I hadn't seen on the road in 20 years, with a high, flat front that looked like a bulldog's face, and still, no lights. It was just a hulking black shape swallowing the road behind me. My hand went to the CB. "Any rigs running eastbound on 24? "Got a dark convoy on my 6, I said, my voice tight. The radio hissed back at me, pure, empty static. It was like the air itself was dead. The lead truck was on my tail now, so close I couldn't see the road in my mirror anymore, just its massive, dark grill. It felt like a predator, a shark in the dark water right behind me. I could feel the pressure of it, a strange, heavy presence that seemed to push against the back of my cab. But there was no sound. I should have been able to hear its engine, the roar of a diesel powerhouse working hard to keep that pace. There was nothing. Only the sound of my own engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. My logical mind was screaming that this was impossible, but my instincts were screaming louder. "Run!" I mashed my foot to the floor. The Cummins engine bellowed in protest as I pushed it past the red line. The truck surged forward, the speedometer needle climbing past 70, then 75, then 80. The whole cab was vibrating, the frame groaning under the strain. I was flying down this narrow 2-lane road at a speed that was suicidally fast. But I didn't care. I had to get away. I dared a glance in the mirror. They were still there. The lead truck was glued to my bumper, and the two behind it were holding their position perfectly. They matched my acceleration effortlessly, their dark shapes filling my mirrors, blotting out the world. It was like being chased by ghosts. My mind was reeling. Who were they? What did they want? The road ahead curved sharply to the left, winding around a large rock outcropping. I knew this curve. It was a dangerous one, with a steep drop-off on the right side. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles bone white, and wrestled the truck through the turn, the tires screaming. As I came out of the curve and onto the straightaway, I held my breath and looked in the mirror again. They were gone. The road behind me was utterly, completely empty. There was no dust, no fading taillights, no sign that they had ever been there. They hadn't turned off. There was nowhere to turn. They had simply vanished into the night. I kept the accelerator floored for another 5 miles before I dared to slow down. I pulled the truck over, my body shaking so violently that I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat in the deafening silence, gasping for air like a drowning man. I was drenched in a cold sweat, my shirt sticking to my back. I tried to rationalize it. A reflection, a mirage caused by atmospheric conditions. My mind desperately searched for a foothold of logic, but found none. I had seen them. I had felt their presence. They were as real as the steering wheel under my trembling hands. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight through to Hewlett, delivered my load, and took the long way back to the interstate, adding 3 hours to my trip just to avoid that stretch of road. I told the story once, to another old-timer at a diner in Cheyenne. He just nodded slowly, stirring his coffee. "The Midnight Convoy," he said, his voice low. "Heard of 'em? They say it's a funeral procession. A bunch of truckers who went off the road in a blizzard back in '78. They say they're still trying to finish their last run. You were lucky. Sometimes they try to get you to join them." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. I'm still a practical man. I still believe in logic and reason. But I also believe that at the stroke of midnight, on the roads that lie in the shadow of Devil's Tower, some things defy explanation. And when you see a convoy of shadows in your mirror, the only logical thing to do is drive like hell. If this story gave you chills, smash the like button and drop a comment below. Another horrifying tale is waiting. Let's continue. My name is Rosa Martinez. I'm 29 and I'm not your grandpa's trucker. My rig is a brand new Volvo VNL 860 and the cab looks more like a spaceship cockpit than the inside of a truck. I've got a digital dash, a collision mitigation system, lane departure warnings, and a satellite link that keeps me connected to the world 24/7. I'm a techie. My phone is my lifeline, my GPS is my Bible, and my playlists are curated to perfection. I believe in data, in signals, in the clear, logical flow of information. The road, to me, is a series of data points: mileage, fuel consumption, ETA. It's predictable, it's controllable, until you get to a place where the old signals are stronger than the new ones. My route was taking me from Minneapolis to Salt Lake City, a haul of medical supplies. It's a long, straight shot across South Dakota and Wyoming, a drive that can bore you to tears if you let it. To keep myself sane, I have a routine. I listen to tech podcasts, catch up on audiobooks, and video call my family during my breaks. I'm always connected, always plugged in. The silence of the road is something I keep at bay with a wall of digital sound. As I crossed into Wyoming, the landscape began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills and dramatic rock formations. The sky seemed to get bigger, and the cell signal started to get patchy. This was expected. I had my satellite radio and a downloaded library of music and podcasts to carry me through the dead zones. And in the distance, a shape began to resolve itself against the horizon. Devil's Tower. I'd only ever seen it in pictures. In person, it's magnetic. It pulls your eyes to it, this impossible stone stump rising out of the earth. It feels ancient and powerful and a little bit intimidating. I was on WY 110, a smaller highway that would eventually loop me back toward I-90. It was a scenic route, and I had some time to kill. The sun was low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple, and the tower was a stark black silhouette against the fiery backdrop. It was beautiful, and I felt a pang of something I rarely feel on the road: awe. That's when my technology started to fail me. It began with the satellite radio. The pop station I was listening to dissolved into a burst of harsh static, a sound like tearing metal. I frowned, tapping the touchscreen display. Satellite signals are supposed to be clear. You either have one or you don't. You don't get static. I tried changing the channel. More static, this time with a strange rhythmic clicking sound buried underneath it. "Come on, you piece of junk," I muttered, switching the audio input to my phone's Bluetooth connection. I put on a high-energy playlist, something with a heavy beat to keep me awake as the light faded. For a minute, it worked. The familiar thump of the bass filled the cab. Then it too began to distort. The music warped and slowed down, the singer's voice dropping an octave, turning into a demonic-sounding drawl before the connection cut out completely. My phone screen flashed a connection error message. Now I was annoyed. I was in a brand new top-of-the-line truck, and my sophisticated sound system was acting like a cheap transistor radio from the 1970s. I switched to the regular FM radio, hoping to catch a local station. I scanned through the channels. Nothing but static, static, and more static. I was about to give up and just drive in silence when I landed on a frequency that was different. It wasn't just static, it was a low humming sound, almost like a human chant. It was faint, buried deep under a layer of electronic noise. I cranked the volume all the way up, leaning toward the speaker. The humming grew louder, and then a voice broke through. It was a man's voice, old and steady. He was speaking in a language I didn't recognize, the words flowing like water over stones. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. The cadence was formal, deliberate, as if he were giving a speech or a sermon. The sound quality was bizarre. It was perfectly clear with no static at all, as if he were sitting right there in the cab with me. Yet it felt like it was coming from a great distance. I was mesmerized. I'd never heard a language like it. It was beautiful, but there was an undercurrent of urgency to it, a tone of profound seriousness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He spoke for about a minute, his voice filling the cab, and then as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The radio fell silent for a moment before the familiar harsh hiss of static returned. My heart was pounding. What had I just heard? Was it some kind of bleed-through from another frequency? A ham radio operator? But the clarity, it was impossible. My tech brain kicked in. I had to have a record of this. I grabbed my phone, hoping the interference had stopped. The Bluetooth icon was still grayed out. I quickly opened my voice recorder app. I switched the radio back to that strange, silent frequency, my fingers praying it would happen again. For a few minutes, there was nothing. I drove on, the tower now much closer, a colossal dark presence to my right. The last light of the sun was gone, and the world was bathed in the pale, silvery light of the rising moon. The road was empty. Then the voice returned. The same old, steady voice, speaking the same unknown language. This time I was ready. I held my phone up to the speaker, my thumb holding down the record button. The voice was just as clear, just as resonant as before. It spoke another long passage, the words filled with a gravity that I could feel in my chest. It didn't sound angry. It sounded sad and weary, like a man who has given the same warning 1,000 times and knows he will have to give it 1,000 more. He finished speaking and the radio went dead. I saved the recording, my hands trembling slightly. I tried the radio again, scanning the entire band. Nothing. The frequency that had carried the voice was now just as empty as all the others. A few miles later, as the tower began to recede in my rearview mirror, my satellite radio crackled back to life, the pop song picking up exactly where it had left off. My phone buzzed, the Bluetooth connection re-established. Everything was back to normal. For the rest of the drive to Salt Lake City, I couldn't get the voice out of my head. When I finally parked my rig at the depot, my first call wasn't to my family. It was to a friend of mine from college, a linguistics professor. I emailed him the audio file, my heart pounding as I typed out the message. "Can you tell me what this is?" His reply came a few hours later. The email was short. "Rosa, where did you get this? This is Lakota. It's a very formal old dialect. The man is reciting a warning. He's talking about a sacred place, a lodge of the bear, and how the spirits of the land grow weary of the noise and disrespect of visitors. He's asking the spirits for patience, but he is also warning that the land will not be silent forever. He says, listen to the silence, for it speaks more than your noise." I sat in the driver's seat of my high-tech rig, the glow of my phone illuminating my face. All my technology, all my signals and data streams had been silenced. And in that silence, a much older signal had broken through. A warning carried on the airwaves from a language I didn't know, about a place I didn't understand. I had gone out there looking for a scenic route, a way to break the monotony. I found something else. I found a reminder that no matter how much we try to pave over it and control it with our technology, the land has a voice. And we are not the only ones sending out signals into the night. My name is Harold Green. I'm 41, married with 2 kids and a mortgage. I'm not a lifer trucker. I'm a guy who drives a truck for a living. There's a difference. For me, the job isn't about the romance of the open road. It's about getting from point A to point B safely, collecting my paycheck and getting home to my family. I'm a cautious man. I check my tires, watch my hours, and I don't take chances. I've seen too many guys who do, and I've seen the wreckage they leave behind on the side of the highway. My goal is to be boring and predictable, but there's no predicting what you'll find on a stormy night in Wyoming. I was hauling a load of lumber to Rapid City, and the weather had been turning against me all day. By the time I hit the stretch of I-90 near Sundance, Wyoming, it was a full-blown thunderstorm. This wasn't just rain, it was a biblical deluge. The sky was a bruised, angry purple, split open every few seconds by jagged forks of lightning. The rain was coming down in solid sheets, so heavy that my wipers, even on their frantic highest setting, could barely keep a patch of the windshield clear for more than a second. Driving in these conditions is the most stressful part of the job. You're piloting a 40-ton machine on slick roads with near zero visibility. Every muscle in your body is tense. Your eyes burn from staring so intently into the chaos, trying to distinguish the white lines of the road from the reflections of your own headlights on the water. My hands were clamped to the steering wheel. My world shrunk to the small semicircular area cleared by my wipers. It was in that small, fleeting window of clarity that I saw it. On the right shoulder of the interstate, a figure. It was standing perfectly still, seemingly oblivious to the gale-force winds and the torrential rain. My first thought was that it was a deer, frozen in my headlights. But the shape was wrong. It was tall and slender, unmistakably human. My heart leaped into my throat. Was it a stranded motorist, someone whose car had broken down? I slowed down, peering through the wall of water. As I got closer, the details became sharper and stranger. The figure was wearing what looked like a long, dark coat, but the rain wasn't plastering it to their body. It just seemed to hang, unaffected. But it was the head, the face, that made me go cold. In the split second that my headlights swept across it, I saw that it had no face. I don't mean the features were obscured by shadow or rain. I mean there was nothing there. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, pale, and vaguely luminescent surface like polished bone or unglazed porcelain. It was a perfect, featureless oval. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, a reflection on a road sign, my tired brain hallucinating. I blinked hard, the wipers swiped across the glass. Swoosh, swoosh. And when my vision cleared for the next second, the figure was gone. The shoulder was empty. There was nothing but the rain, the guardrail, and the darkness beyond. "Did I just see that?" I said aloud, my voice a croak. My truck rumbled on, but my mind was stuck back there on that patch of empty shoulder. I couldn't have imagined it. The image was burned into my brain, that tall, still form and the horrifying blankness of its face. I thought about stopping, but what would I do? Get out in this storm and look for... what? A faceless ghost? The very idea was insane. Besides, stopping an 80,000-pound truck on the shoulder of the interstate in a storm like this was just asking for someone to rear end. The safest thing to do, the only thing to do, was to keep going. But my composure was shattered. Every flash of lightning made me jump, my eyes darting to the side of the road, half expecting to see it again. The storm, which had just been a dangerous weather condition, now felt menacing, malevolent. It felt like the darkness was hiding things that could appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. I grabbed my CB mic, needing to hear another human voice. "Anybody else driving through this mess near Sundance?" I asked. A weary voice came back instantly. "Yeah, I'm right behind you, about a mile back. This is one for the books, ain't it? You see anything strange on the side of the road?" I asked, trying to sound casual. There was a pause. "What do you mean, strange?" the voice asked, a new note of caution in it. "I don't know, just figures, people." The pause was longer this time. When the man finally spoke again, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You saw him, didn't you? The tall man." The blood drained from my face. "The what?" "The tall man," he repeated, "or the blank man. Depends on who you ask. They say he only shows up in the worst storms, right around this area. My granddaddy was a trucker. He told me stories about seeing him back in the 60s. Said he's a bad omen, a storm walker." I was speechless. This wasn't just my imagination, someone else knew. This was a thing. "Just keep your eyes on the road, driver," the voice on the CB continued. "Don't look for him. Don't stop for him, he's part of the storm. You just drive through it and get to the other side." I did as he said. I put the mic down and forced myself to focus on the road, on the taillights of a car that appeared ahead of me, a welcome sign of normalcy in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. I followed those lights like they were a lifeline. The storm finally broke about 30 miles east of Sundance. The rain lessened to a drizzle and the lightning faded into the distance, but the image of that pale, faceless figure never left me. I'm a man who believes in tangible things, in lumber and steel and the solid feel of the road under my tires. But on that night I saw something that wasn't solid, something that didn't belong to the world of paychecks and mortgages. It belonged to the storm, to the darkness, to the stories that old truckers whisper to each other over the radio on rainy nights. I made it home to my family just like I always do. But I know now that being cautious isn't always enough, because some dangers aren't on the road. They're standing on the shoulder waiting for the rain. My name is Tammy Lewis. I'm 37 and my world is constructed of paper, ink, and satellite signals. I am a planner. This isn't just a personality trait. It's the core of my professional identity, the very reason I succeed in an industry that thrives on chaos. My life, both on and off the road, runs on schedules, on maps, on meticulously planned routes that account for everything from fuel consumption to the average wait time at way stations. In the passenger seat of my cab, where other drivers might have a pile of fast food wrappers or a sleeping dog, I have the binder. The binder is a 3-inch thick D-ringed behemoth, a testament to my obsession with order. It's filled with printouts of every route I might conceivably take, each page a tapestry of highlighted lines, handwritten annotations, and color-coded tabs. I have primary routes in yellow, secondary routes for known construction zones in orange, and tertiary emergency routes in red. Before every trip, I cross-reference my company's GPS with 2 other mapping apps on my tablet, looking for discrepancies, for new road closures, for a more efficient path. I know my fuel stops, my rest breaks, and my arrival times down to the minute. To me, trucking is not a journey. It's a giant logic puzzle, a complex equation of time, distance, and variables. And I am very, very good at solving it. I don't get lost, ever. So when I tell you I got lost in Wyoming, you have to understand what that means. It doesn't mean I missed a turn or had to double back. It means the puzzle broke. It means the fundamental laws of geography and reason, the very principles upon which my entire life is built, simply ceased to apply. The load was a sealed, high-value transport. I never know what's in them, just that they're important enough to warrant a dedicated sealed trailer and a direct route. I was taking it from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Cody. The route is straightforward, a familiar path I'd driven before. A long, straight shot up I-25 to Casper, then a westward turn onto US 20. A road that snakes through the starkly beautiful, empty heart of the state. It was a simple A to B problem. But that day, the equation was disrupted. A major accident, a multi-vehicle pileup on I-25 north of Cheyenne, had the interstate shut down indefinitely. My dispatcher, a harried man named Dave, called me. His voice was tinny over the Bluetooth connection. "Tammy, I-25 is a parking lot. It's going to be hours, maybe all day. We need to get you on an alternate." I was already flipping through the binder. "I've got one," I said, my voice calm and confident. "State Highway 59 to 387, then cut over on 50. It'll add about 90 miles, but it's better than sitting still." "Good," Dave said, a note of relief in his voice. He knew my reputation. "It'll take you through the back of Beyond, up toward the tower. Watch yourself out there. It gets lonely." I wasn't worried. Lonely was just another variable. I had it all mapped out in the binder and already programmed into my primary and backup GPS systems. State Highway 59 to 387 to 50, simple. I settled in for a long, quiet drive through the rolling emptiness of eastern Wyoming. The sun was bright in a brilliant, cloudless blue sky. The air was crisp and clean. Everything, despite the initial disruption, was going according to plan. The first 2 legs of the new route were exactly as expected. Long, empty stretches of well-maintained 2-lane highway. I made good time. The landscape was a hypnotic panorama of pale green and dusty brown hills under an immense sky. I was in my element, just me, my rig, and the solvable problem of the road ahead. The first sign of trouble appeared at the turnoff for Highway 50. It was a standard orange and black diamond-shaped sign, the kind I've seen 1,000 times. It was propped up on a flimsy-looking metal stand that was slightly bent, as if it had been set up in a hurry. The bold black letters read, "Road closed ahead, detour." An arrow, equally stark, pointed left, down a narrow county road that was little more than a crack in the landscape. I sighed, a puff of pure frustration. An unscheduled, unlogged detour. It was annoying, a wrinkle in my perfectly smooth plan, but it happens. Road crews work in the summer, and local closures don't always make it into the big databases in real time. You trust the signs, It's one of the first rules of the road. I checked my GPS. The screen showed my planned route in a confident blue line. The voice, a calm, synthesized woman, was frantically trying to reroute. Her digital voice insisting, "In 1/4 mile, make a legal U-turn." I ignored her. The GPS is a powerful tool, but it's not omniscient. It doesn't know about a temporary closure put in place an hour ago by a county road crew. The sign on the ground trumps the satellite in the sky. With a sense of grudging acceptance, I slowed my rig and made the turn. The truck groaned as it left the smooth state highway and onto the county road. It was paved, but just barely. The asphalt was old and cracked, a mosaic of patched potholes and spider-webbing fissures. The yellow line down the middle was a faded ghost, worn away by sun and snow until it was barely visible. The road immediately began to curve, a gentle winding path that snaked its way through low grassy hills. And there, off to my right, visible in the vast clear air, was Devil's Tower. It looked like a giant petrified tree stump. A colossal thumb sticking up out of the plains, its presence both incongruous and deeply, primordially correct. I drove for 10 minutes, then 20. The road kept curving. It was a constant gentle arc to the right, a slow, hypnotic bend that never straightened out. Every time I thought it was about to crest a hill and reconnect with a main highway, it would just dip down and bend again. There were no other detour signs, no mileage markers, no road numbers, no mailboxes, no houses. Just the cracked asphalt, the endless rolling hills, and the barbed wire fences that hemmed in the empty pastures. My GPS was now officially useless. The calm female voice had given up. The screen showed my truck's icon sitting forlornly in a blank green field, a digital representation of off the map. The only sign of my journey was a single desperate blue line tracing my path back to where I'd left the main road, a path that was looking more and more like a question mark. A feeling of unease, cold and unfamiliar, began to creep into the edges of my hyper-logical mind. This was taking too long. A detour is meant to be a bypass, a short loop around a problem. This felt less like a loop and more like a spiral. I hadn't seen another car, not a single headlight or dust cloud, since I'd made the turn. The world had gone silent, save for the low hum of my engine. The only landmark, the only fixed point in this shifting, featureless landscape was the tower. And I started to notice something strange about it. It wasn't getting closer or farther away. It wasn't shifting to my left or right as I drove. It seemed to be staying in the exact same position relative to my truck, a constant presence on my right flank. It was as if the road I was on was a perfect, massive circle drawn around the monument, and I was a tiny metal bug crawling along its circumference. My planner's brain rejected the idea. It was a trick of perspective, of the vast distances. I needed a landmark, a concrete data point to prove I was making forward progress. And then I saw one. It was a rusted-out old water trough for cattle, the kind made from a big galvanized steel tub. It sat right by the side of the road, nestled against a fence where one of the wooden posts had broken and was leaning at a drunken angle. The rust on the trough was distinctive, a large map-like stain that looked vaguely like the state of Texas. I made a sharp mental note of it, a small pin dropped on my internal map. Okay, at least I'm still moving forward. I have a baseline. I drove for another 15 minutes. The sun, which had been high and bright, was starting to dip lower in the sky, its light turning from a harsh white to a softer gold. The hills rolled by, identical and unending. The tower remained in its fixed position to my right. The sense of unease was growing, blooming into a genuine low-grade anxiety. And then I saw it again, the rusted-out water trough. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a similar trough. It was the exact same one. The same map of Texas rust stain, the same broken leaning fence post. It was impossible. I couldn't have circled back. There had been no turnoffs, no intersections, no forks in the road. The road was a single, continuous, unbroken line. I kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My planner's brain was short-circuiting, throwing error messages like a crashing computer. This was not logical. This could not be happening. It must have been a similar trough. Ranchers use the same equipment. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. I clung to that explanation like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. 10 minutes later, my driftwood shattered. I saw it a third time. The trough, the rust stain, the broken post. It was waiting for me around a gentle curve, a silent, mocking testament to my lack of progress. Panic, hot and sharp, set in. I was trapped. I was on a road that didn't go anywhere, a loop that wasn't a loop. It was like I was on a treadmill in a gym from hell, the scenery just a projection on a screen repeating itself over and over. The sun was getting dangerously low now, the shadows of the hills stretching like long, dark fingers across the road. The thought of being stuck out here in this impossible, illogical place after dark was terrifying in a way I had never experienced. It wasn't the fear of a breakdown or a hijacker. It was the fear of the world itself coming undone. I stomped on the brakes, bringing the big rig to a halt in the middle of the non-road. The silence that descended when I killed the engine was absolute and terrifying. I got out the binder, my hands shaking. I spread my maps across the passenger seat, my tablet next to them, its screen still showing me lost in a green void. I stared at them, at the neat lines and the logical progressions, trying to force the world to make sense again, trying to impose the order of my paper world onto the chaos of the real one. But the maps were useless. They showed me where I should be, not where I was. I was in a place that wasn't on the map. There was only one logical thing left to do, even in this illogical nightmare. I had to backtrack. I had to go back the way I came. I started the engine, its roar a defiant shout against the oppressive silence. I found a spot where the shoulder was slightly wider and began the painstaking, nerve-wracking process of turning my 70-foot rig around on a narrow 2-lane road. It took me 20 agonizing minutes, my nerves fraying with every inch I backed toward the ditch. My neck craned, my mirrors showing me nothing but the same empty hills. Finally, I was pointing in the direction I came from. I started driving, my eyes peeled for the turnoff to the main highway, praying it would still be there. I drove. The sun touched the horizon, and the world was plunged into the surreal, gloomy light of dusk. The hills were cast in long, distorted shadows, and the landscape, which had been merely monotonous, now felt menacing. The tower was now on my left, a dark, silent sentinel watching my pathetic, failed escape. And then, like a recurring nightmare, I passed the rusted water trough again. This time it felt like a tombstone marking the grave of my sanity. Just as true black despair was about to set in, as I was about to just stop the truck and break down completely, I saw it. Up ahead at the side of the road, glinting in the last of the light, the detour sign. It was the same flimsy orange and black sign propped up on its bent metal stand. But now, the arrow was pointing to my right, pointing me back toward the highway I had left what felt like a lifetime ago. I slowed the truck to a crawl as I approached it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked down the road I had just come from. It stretched back into the darkening hills, the same cracked, winding, impossible road. Then I looked to my right. The main highway was right there. It was less than 100 feet away, its smooth asphalt and bright, clear markings a vision of beautiful, blessed normalcy. It had been there the whole time, just beyond a small rise I hadn't been able to see over. With a sob of relief, I made the turn, my tires humming as they hit the well-maintained surface of the state highway. I was back. I was free. I drove for about a quarter of a mile, my body shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline and relief. I pulled over onto the wide, stable shoulder and put the truck in park. I needed a minute to collect myself, to breathe, to reassure myself that I was back in the real world. I looked in my rearview mirror, needing one last look at the mouth of that hellish side road. The county road was gone. The detour sign was gone. Where the intersection should have been, where I had just turned from, there was just an unbroken line of grass and sagebrush stretching from the edge of the highway to a barbed wire fence. There was no side road. There was no turnoff. There was no detour. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, watching the last of the sun disappear and the first stars appear in the deep purple sky. The binder, with all its neat lines, its careful calculations, and its unwavering logic, sat on the passenger seat, a monument to a kind of order that didn't apply here. I had driven for hours on a road that did not exist. I had been caught in a loop, a wrinkle in the fabric of the world, a glitch in the matrix, all under the silent, watchful gaze of that ancient, silent tower. I finally put the truck in gear and got back on the road, not bothering to check my GPS or my ETA. I knew my schedule was shot. The neat, predictable puzzle of my day had been shattered. I had learned a terrifying lesson on that non-existent road, that no matter how well you plan, no matter how detailed your maps are, there are some detours you can't plan for. And some places you don't find on a map, they find you. My name is Carl Peterson. I'm 55 years old and my body is a road map of the 35 years I've spent behind the wheel of a semi-truck. My left knee aches when the rain is coming, a dull throb that tells me more than any weather forecast. My back is a constant low-grade complaint, a souvenir from millions of miles of bad roads and worse truck stop mattresses. I've been driving since I was 20, since before the days of GPS and satellite radio, back when a good set of maps and a powerful CB were a driver's best friends. Now I'm on the downhill slope to retirement, the final long grade before I can finally put the truck in park for good. My wife, Linda, has a big glass jar on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker. It's a pickle jar, washed clean, and on the front she's taped a label written in her neat, careful script. Alaska Cruise. Every month when the checks come in, we put away a little extra, folding the bills and pushing them through the slot in the lid. Watching that jar fill up bill by bill is the only thing that gets me through the long nights, the endless miles, and the cheap, greasy food that fuels this industry. I'm not a thrill seeker. I'm not a man who loves the open road for its romance. I'm a man who is tired, a man who is simply working his way toward a finish line that involves a balcony cabin and a view of glaciers. I've seen enough weird things on the road to fill a book. I've seen horrific crashes, cars accordioned into unrecognizable shapes. I've driven through freak weather, blizzards that appeared out of a clear blue sky and thunderstorms that threw lightning like angry gods. I've seen people in their cars doing things they think no one can see, lost in their own little worlds of passion or despair. But it was all explainable. It was all just part of the strange, messy, sometimes tragic tapestry of humanity. What I saw on a quiet Tuesday night on Highway 24 in the deep, dark heart of Wyoming was not part of that tapestry. It was a thread from somewhere else entirely, something from a place where the rules of our world are frayed and torn. The load was simple, as routine as it gets. Palletized fertilizer from a plant in Nebraska to a farmer's co-op in northern Wyoming. It was a route I knew well, a familiar sequence of interstates and state highways. The final leg of the journey, the loneliest part, would take me right past Devil's Tower in the dead of night. I'd driven it 100 times and never thought much of it. To me, it was just a big rock, a massive, silent landmark that told me I was about 2 hours from my drop-off, 2 hours closer to finishing the run and getting home. The night was perfect for driving. The air was clear and cold. the kind of high plains night where the stars look like chips of ice scattered on black velvet. The moon was a bright, hard sliver, casting enough light to give the rolling hills a ghostly, silvered edge. The road was mine. I hadn't seen another vehicle for the better part of an hour. It was just me, the steady, comforting rumble of my engine, and the pleasant, recurring thought of that Alaska cruise jar getting a little fuller. I was cruising at a steady 60 miles per hour, my mind in that half-meditative state that all long-haul drivers know so well. You're awake, you're alert, your hands are steady on the wheel, but part of your brain is just coasting. It's a state of relaxed vigilance, a mental autopilot that lets you eat up the miles. That's when a flicker of light in my driver's side mirror, a tiny pinprick of movement in the vast, static darkness behind me, brought me back to full attention. It was a pair of headlights, far behind me but coming up fast. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, but not unheard of to see another vehicle. Probably just a local in a pickup truck, eager to get home after a late shift, or maybe another trucker pushing to make a deadline. I watched the lights grow steadily in my mirror, a familiar sight in my line of work. But as the vehicle got closer, its shape began to resolve itself, and I realized it wasn't a pickup. It was another truck, an old one. It was a flatbed, a bobtail running without a trailer. The cab was a short, pug-nosed design, a cab-over model that I hadn't seen in regular use for at least 20 years. The paint job was a grimy, rust-colored mess that seemed to soak up the moonlight rather than reflect it, giving it a strange, flat, two-dimensional quality. The headlights were a sickly, weak yellow color, like old, tired light bulbs struggling to push back the darkness. The truck closed the distance between us with an unnerving, predatory speed. It didn't slow down as it approached my rear. It just kept coming, a relentless, charging bull. I braced myself, expecting it to swing out into the opposite lane and roar past me. But it didn't. At the last possible second, it slowed abruptly and settled in right behind me. And when I say right behind me, I mean it was on my mud flaps. It was so close that its dim yellow headlights were completely swallowed by the bulk of my trailer. All I could see in my mirror was the top of its cab and the dark, menacing shape of its grille, which looked like a mouthful of broken teeth. It was an act of insane aggression, a blatant challenge. My first reaction was a surge of pure irritation. "Get off my tail, you idiot," I grumbled to the empty cab, my hands tightening on the wheel. Tailgating is one of the dumbest, most dangerous things you can do on the highway. And to do it to a fully loaded semi is suicidal. If I had to hit my brakes suddenly for a deer or any other reason, he'd be embedded in my trailer before he even knew what was happening. I decided to give him a gentle warning. I tapped my brakes a couple of times, a quick, polite flash of my bright red brake lights. It's the universal signal for back off. The truck didn't budge. It stayed locked in position, a menacing, parasitic shadow glued to my rear. Now I was getting angry. I was too old for these kinds of childish, dangerous games. My heart was beating a little faster, the adrenaline starting to flow. "All right, pal, you want to play?" I muttered. I sped up a little, pushing my rig to 65. The rusty flatbed matched my speed instantly, never varying its distance by so much as an inch. It was like it was magnetically attached to me. I slowed down to 55. It slowed down with me, a perfect synchronized movement that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. It was like it was tethered to me by an invisible, unyielding rope. A cold trickle of sweat ran down my temple despite the chill in the cab. This wasn't normal aggressive driving. This wasn't road rage. This was something else. This was predatory. It felt calculated, intelligent, and completely alien. The road ahead was a long, empty straightaway, a silver ribbon under the moonlight. I decided I had to try and get a look at the driver. This maniac who was playing chicken with 40 tons of steel. I needed to see the face of the person who was doing this. I adjusted my driver's side mirror, tilting it down and in, trying to get an angle that would let me see into his cab. The moonlight was bright, bright enough that I should have been able to see a silhouette, the shape of a person behind the wheel, maybe the faint glow of a cigarette or a dashboard light. I squinted, focusing on the dark, grimy rectangle of his windshield. There was nothing. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, that the strange dim light was creating an illusion. I looked again, harder this time, my face close to the mirror. The cab was empty. There was no silhouette. There was no movement. There was no faint glow from a dashboard. The driver's seat, a dark, hulking shape, was vacant. The steering wheel was a dark, still circle against the slightly less dark interior. The truck was driving itself. The realization hit me not as a thought, but as a physical blow. It felt like a fist of ice had just punched through my chest, stealing my breath and leaving a hollow, frozen void. My throat constricted. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror, a kind of fear I hadn't felt since I was a child, waking from a nightmare, washed over me. My mind, my logical, practical, 55-year-old mind, scrambled, desperately trying to find a rational explanation. A trick of the light? A reflection? Maybe the driver was slumped down, asleep. But who would be asleep while their truck was perfectly mirroring my every move at 60 miles per hour? Number. I knew what I was seeing, or rather what I wasn't seeing. There was no driver. The rusty truck was still there, a silent, malevolent presence latched onto my tail. I could feel it more than see it now. A palpable weight in the air behind me, a pressure against the back of my cab. I felt hunted. The feeling was primal, ancient. I was no longer a man in a machine, I was prey. Being stalked by a predator made of rust and steel, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure it was audible over the engine's roar. The image of the Alaska cruise, of Linda, of my quiet, predictable life seemed a million miles away. A dream from another lifetime. My entire world had shrunk to the confines of my cab and the horrifying, empty truck in my mirror. I had to get away. The instinct for self-preservation, raw and overwhelming, took over. I floored the accelerator. My big Cummins engine bellowed a deep, guttural roar of protest as I pushed it past the red line. The truck surged forward, the speedometer needle climbing, 70, 75, 80. The wind howled past my windows, a high, mournful shriek. The whole cab was vibrating, the frame groaning under the strain. I was flying down this narrow two-lane road at a speed that was reckless, suicidal, but I didn't care. I had to break the invisible tether. I had to escape. I dared a glance in the mirror, my heart sinking as I saw it. The old rusty flatbed was still there. It had stayed right with me, its sickly yellow eyes burning a hole in my mirror. It was as if the laws of physics, of mass and inertia and wind resistance didn't apply to it. An old truck like that, running bobtail with no weight on its axles, should have been bouncing all over the road at that speed. It should have been struggling to keep up. But it was perfectly steady, a rock-solid shadow of death, its pursuit effortless and terrifying. Up ahead, I saw a sharp curve in the road winding around a dark outcropping of rock. A desperate, insane idea born of pure panic formed in my mind. It was a terrible gamble, but it was the only card I had left to play. I kept my foot on the floor until the last possible second, letting the phantom truck think I was going to try and take the curve at this insane speed. Then I stomped on the brakes. The air brakes shrieked, a sound of pure mechanical agony. My rig shuddered violently, the tires screaming in protest as I fought the wheel, trying to keep the trailer from swinging around and jackknifing. I was trying to force the phantom truck to make a choice, either slam into my rear or swerve to avoid me. I braced myself for the impact, for the sickening final crunch of metal that I was sure would be the last sound I ever heard. I squeezed my eyes shut. But there was no impact. There was no sound of screeching tires, no shattering glass, no rending metal. I opened my eyes. As my truck slowed, its momentum bleeding away, the rusty flatbed didn't break. It didn't swerve. It simply turned. It veered sharply to the right, leaving the pavement as if it were an optional suggestion. It didn't slow down. It continued at full speed, heading straight out into the empty, moonlit sagebrush plains. It bounced violently over the rough, uneven terrain, its yellow headlights cutting a crazed swath through the darkness. It moved with an unnatural, terrifying purpose, like a machine possessed by a single, malevolent thought. I brought my rig to a stop in the middle of the highway, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the phantom truck continued its impossible journey. It drove for another half a mile into the wilderness, into a place where no road had ever been, and then its lights just went out. They didn't fade into the distance. They blinked out of existence as if a switch had been flipped, leaving only the silent, empty, moonlit plains. The truck had vanished. I sat in my cab, the engine idling, its familiar rumble the only sound in a world that had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. I was shaking uncontrollably, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that I couldn't stop. I tried to use the CB radio to call out, to ask if anyone else was out there, if anyone had seen what I had seen. But my hand was trembling so badly I could barely hold the mic. Did anyone see that? I stammered into the static, not even knowing if I was transmitting. The radio answered with a dead, empty hiss. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. Time had lost its meaning. Eventually, the deep-seated survival instinct, the professional driver's need to keep moving, kicked in. I had to get out of there. I put the truck in gear and drove, my eyes constantly flicking to my mirrors, my heart seizing at every shadow, fully expecting to see those two sickly yellow lights reappear behind me. But the road remained empty. I made my delivery in a daze, my hands still shaking as I signed the paperwork. The co-op manager asked me if I was feeling all right. I just nodded and mumbled something about a long night. I took a different route home, a long, circuitous path that added 6 hours to my trip just to avoid that stretch of highway, to avoid the place where the rules had broken. I never told Linda. How could I? How could I put into words the sheer, mind-bending terror of that night? How could I explain that I was chased by a ghost truck, a machine with no driver, a predator made of rust and malice? She would think I'd lost my mind, that the years on the road had finally cracked me. So I just put an extra $100 in the Alaska cruise jar and told her I'd had a good run. Sometimes, even now when I'm driving at night on a lonely road and a pair of headlights appears in my mirror, my heart still seizes up. A cold sweat breaks out on my forehead, and my hands grip the wheel until my knuckles are white. I'm counting the days until I can put my keys on the hook for the last time, until I can hear that cruise ship horn blow and know that my miles are done. I've seen enough of the open road. I know now that not all the monsters are in the storybooks. Some of them are out there on the highways, running without drivers, their yellow eyes searching for someone to follow into the dark. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale. My name is Jessica White. I'm 32, and in a world that still seems surprised to see a woman behind the wheel of a big rig, I'm a flatbedder. That means I don't haul the neat, tidy boxes. I haul the big, awkward, challenging stuff. Massive I-beams that will become the skeletons of buildings, oversized industrial machinery that looks like alien technology, colossal pipes that could swallow a man whole. It's a physically demanding job that requires more than just driving. It requires securing the load with heavy chains and straps, balancing the weight perfectly, and maneuvering through spaces that were never designed for something so large. I'm proud of the fact that I can handle it. I'm strong, I'm independent, and I'm not easily spooked. My career has been a tour of the country's most desolate places. I've slept in my cab in the humid, insect-thick silence of the Louisiana swamps, the oppressive, heat-soaked quiet of the Nevada deserts, and the vast, wind-scoured emptiness of the Great Plains. I've always found a deep, profound peace in the silence of those remote places. It was a welcome break from the constant noise of the cities, the endless chatter of the CB radio and the drone of the highway. Silence was my reward, a chance to reset, to be alone with my own thoughts under a canopy of stars you can't see from anywhere else. But one night in a quiet canyon in the shadow of Devil's Tower, the silence was broken by a sound so terrible, so fundamentally wrong that I'd now give anything to have the noise back. I'd trade a lifetime of highway drone just to unhear what I heard that night. The job was a good one. I was hauling a load of steel I-beams from a fabricator in Colorado to a new construction site in Montana. The schedule was relaxed, a get-it-there-when-you-get-it-there kind of deal, which is a rare luxury in this business. It meant I wasn't pushing myself, not chasing the clock. I could take my time, enjoy the drive, and take my full, federally mandated 10-hour break without feeling guilty. As evening fell, I found myself on a quiet state highway that wound its way through a series of deep, rocky canyons in northeastern Wyoming. The landscape was breathtakingly, almost aggressively beautiful. Sheer cliffs of red and gray rock, striated with millions of years of geological history, rose up on either side of the road. The setting sun painted the rock faces in fiery shades of orange and deep, bruised purple. In the distance, visible through a V-shaped notch in the canyon walls, was Devil's Tower. It stood as a dark, brooding, and utterly alien shape against the vibrant twilight sky. It didn't look like it belonged to the surrounding landscape. It looked like it had been dropped there from another world. My logbook, the unforgiving electronic sentinel that governs a trucker's life, told me it was time for my mandatory 10-hour break. Just as the thought crossed my mind, I saw a small brown sign. Scenic Overlook, 1/4 mile. It felt like a gift from the road gods. I pulled in. It was a perfect spot, better than any truck stop. The overlook was a wide, paved, semicircular area carved out of the side of the canyon, with a low stone wall at the edge providing a barrier against the dizzying drop. Below the canyon floor was a dark, tangled mess of pine trees and massive jumbled rocks, a wild and untamed place. I was the only one there. The last tourist had long since departed. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the air grew cold with the swiftness of a high-altitude evening. I went through my routine. I did my post-trip inspection, walking the length of my rig, thumping the tires with a tire iron, checking the chains on my load. The familiar thud and clank of the metal, a comforting, solid sound. I cooked a quick meal of soup and crackers on my small portable stove, the steam from the pot rising into the crisp, clean air. Then, content and tired, I climbed into my sleeper berth, a cozy, self-contained little world, and settled in for the night. The silence was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket broken only by the gentle, almost inaudible whisper of the wind through the canyon. It was peaceful. It was perfect. I fell asleep quickly and deeply, the way you only can when you're physically tired and mentally at ease. I don't know what time it was when the sound first woke me. It was faint, distant, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I had heard it or dreamed it. It was a high-pitched wailing sound, thin and ethereal, like the wind whistling through a narrow crack in the rock on a stormy night. But there was no storm. I was half asleep, my mind fuzzy and unwilling to engage. I rolled over, pulling my blanket tighter around my shoulders, and tried to slip back into the welcome oblivion of sleep. Then I heard it again. This time it was louder, more distinct. And it wasn't the wind. The wind is a natural, mindless sound. This sound had a voice. It had intent. It was a scream. It was undeniably a human scream, thin and reedy as if carried from a great distance, but sharp with a terror that cut through the night air. It echoed off the canyon walls, the sound bouncing and multiplying, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. It rose in pitch to a frantic, desperate shriek, and then it was abruptly cut off as if a hand had been clamped over a mouth. I sat bolt upright in my bunk, my heart instantly pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. My first rational thought was that it was an animal. I've heard the screams of a mountain lion, the yips and howls of coyotes. They can sound eerily human. But I've heard those sounds before. This was different. This was human. It was the sound of a person in mortal terror or agony. I strained my ears, my body rigid, listening to the now deafening silence. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was the last vestige of a nightmare, my sleeping brain playing tricks on me. The only sound was the low, almost subliminal hum of my truck's small refrigerator and my own, ragged, shallow breathing. I was about to lie back down to convince myself it was nothing when it came again. And this time, it was not alone. It was a chorus of screams. They erupted from the canyon below, a cacophony of terrified voices, men and women, even what sounded like the high, piercing cries of children, all screaming at once. It was a sound from the deepest, darkest pit of a collective nightmare, a sound of mass panic and unimaginable horror. They weren't just screams of fear, they were screams of pain, of anguish, of pure, hopeless despair. The voices echoed and overlapped, bouncing off the rock walls, creating a dizzying, terrifying, three-dimensional soundscape that filled my cab. It sounded like 100 people were being slaughtered at the bottom of the canyon. I scrambled out of my bunk and into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely find the armrests. I peered out the windshield into the inky darkness. The canyon was a black void, a pit of nothingness. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. The screaming was relentless, a tidal wave of pure auditory horror that seemed to pass right through the metal and glass of my cab and sink its icy claws directly into my bones. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the soul. My mind raced, desperately trying to find a logical container for this impossible sound. What could it be? A tour bus crash? Had a bus gone over the edge of the highway somewhere up the road? A group of hikers who had fallen, a terrible chain reaction accident in the dark? I grabbed my phone from its cradle on the dash, my fingers fumbling on the smooth glass screen. I had 1 bar of service, a weak, flickering signal that was my only connection to the sane world. I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and utterly surreal. A voice from a world where things made sense. A stark contrast to the hellish noise echoing from outside my truck. 911. What is your location and the nature of your emergency? I'm a truck driver, I said, my own voice trembling so much I barely recognized it. I'm at a scenic overlook on highway. I think it's 112 near Devil's Tower. There's a canyon here. I hear screaming. A lot of screaming. It sounds like, oh God, it sounds like something terrible has happened. Screaming, ma'am? The dispatcher asked, her tone still maddeningly calm. Can you describe the screaming? It's people. Dozens of them. It sounds like a massacre, I yelled, my voice cracking with hysteria. I pressed the phone harder against my ear as if that could somehow make her understand the urgency, the sheer horror of the sound. The screams outside seemed to swell in volume, a desperate pleading chorus that begged for help. "Okay, ma'am, stay calm," the dispatcher said, her voice taking on a firmer, more practiced tone. "Stay in your vehicle and lock your doors. We will dispatch a sheriff's deputy to your location. Can you see anything in the canyon?" "No, it's pitch black, but you have to send help. People are dying," I pleaded, tears of frustration and terror welling in my eyes. "A deputy is on the way, ma'am. Your location is pinging about 15 miles west of the tower. We know the overlook. Just stay put." The line went dead. I was alone again with the sounds. The screaming continued for what felt like an eternity. It was not a constant single note. It rose and fell. Sometimes it would subside to a low, collective moaning, a heartbreaking sound of pain and despair that was almost worse than the shrieks. Then, as if a fresh new horror was being inflicted, it would rise again into a wave of sharp, piercing screams that felt like needles in my ears. I sat huddled in my driver's seat, my knees pulled up to my chest, my arms wrapped around them in a futile attempt to make myself smaller, to protect myself from a threat that was only sound. I stared out into the blackness that was hiding an unspeakable horror. I was a strong, independent woman, a person who prided herself on her competence and her fearlessness. But in that moment I felt like a small, helpless child, terrified of the monster under the bed. After about 30 minutes, which felt like a lifetime, I saw the blessed, beautiful sight of flashing red and blue lights approaching from down the highway. A sheriff's car pulled into the overlook and parked behind my rig, its lights bathing my cab in a strobing, silent disco of emergency. A deputy got out, a big man with a calm, weathered face and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who has seen it all. He walked up to my cab, his hand resting casually on his sidearm, and shone his powerful flashlight on my face. I shielded my eyes from the glare and rolled down the window. "Are you the one who called?" he asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Yes." "Yes, can't you hear it?" I whispered, my voice hoarse, gesturing wildly toward the canyon with a trembling hand. He tilted his head, a gesture of patient listening. The screaming was still going on, fainter now. A high-pitched, keening wail in the distance, like the sound was finally running out of energy. The deputy's expression didn't change. He didn't look alarmed or concerned. He just looked tired. "Hear what, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentle. I stared at him in utter disbelief. Was he deaf? Was he mocking me? "The screaming! Listen!" I insisted, my voice rising again. He stood there in the cold night air for a full minute, his head cocked, a statue of patient authority. Then he shook his head slowly. "All I hear is the wind, ma'am. It gets pretty loud in these canyons. The way it funnels through the rocks, it can play tricks on you." "No!" "It's not the wind," I insisted, my voice cracking with a new kind of hysteria, the hysteria of not being believed. "It was people. I've been listening to them for almost an hour. They were screaming in pain." The deputy sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of 100 similar nights. "We get this call a couple of times a year," he said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more confidential. "Always from this overlook, always on a clear, quiet night. Someone pulls over to rest and they hear the canyon echoes, as the old-timers call it." "Canyon echoes," I repeated, the words feeling strange and meaningless in my mouth. My mind was struggling to grasp what he was saying, to shift from the tangible horror of a massacre to the intangible horror he was suggesting. "There's a story," he said, his voice dropping even lower as if sharing a secret. "A legend. Back in the late 1800s, a wagon train of settlers trying to beat the winter took a shortcut through this canyon. It wasn't a real trail. They got trapped by an early freak blizzard, The snow came down so fast and so deep they couldn't get the wagons out. They say none of them made it. They starved or froze to death right down there on the canyon floor. He gestured with his flashlight into the blackness, the beam swallowed by the immense dark void. The story goes that on certain nights when the air is just right, the canyon replays it. It remembers. We hear the sound of them dying. I stared at him, my mouth agape, a cold dread seeping into me that was far worse than the initial panic. The screams had faded now, replaced once again by the gentle, innocent whisper of the wind. The horror I was feeling began to shift, to transmute from a fear of a present, physical danger to the deep, chilling, existential dread of a supernatural one. "You're telling me I just listened to ghosts?" I whispered, the word tasting like ash. The deputy just shrugged, a gesture that was both a confirmation and a dismissal. "I'm not telling you what to believe, ma'am. I'm just telling you you're not the first person to hear it. We've searched this canyon from top to bottom more times than I can count, with dogs, with helicopters. We've never found a thing. Not a bone, not a shred of cloth, nothing. My advice to you is to start your engine and drive on. Find a well-lit truck stop for your break. Some places out here, they just aren't meant for sleeping." He gave me a final, sympathetic nod, walked back to his car, and drove away. His taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me alone in the profound, heavy silence. But the silence was different now. It was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was filled with the memory of those terrible sounds, with the echoes of a century-old tragedy. I didn't need any more convincing. I fired up my engine, the loud, powerful roar of the diesel, a comforting, modern sound in this ancient, haunted place. I pulled out of the overlook and didn't look back. I drove all the way to Montana without stopping, my radio blasting, filling the cab with noise, any noise, to keep the memory of the screams at bay. I'm a flatbedder. I haul the solid, tangible things of this world, steel, concrete, machinery. But that night I learned that the most terrifying things are the ones you can't see, the ones you can only hear. They are the echoes of a pain so immense, a tragedy so profound, that the very rocks of the earth can't forget it. And sometimes, on a quiet night, they are forced to scream. My name is Bill Randall. I'm 48, and if you were to cut me open, you'd probably find diesel fuel in my veins and the faint outline of a highway map on my heart. I've spent more than half my life on the road, a quarter-century pilgrimage measured in mile markers and cups of burnt coffee. I'm a creature of habit, a man who finds comfort in the predictable rhythm of the road. I have my favorite routes, my favorite truck stops where the waitresses know my order, my favorite greasy spoon diners where the pie is always fresh. I know that the best coffee in 3 different states is at a little place off I-80 in Iowa, and I know that the stretch of I-15 through the Virgin River Gorge is a speed trap disguised as a scenic drive. Predictability is my co-pilot. The road itself is unpredictable enough, with its sudden blizzards, its four-wheelers driving like they're in a video game, and the constant threat of a blown tire without looking for extra trouble. I've always been a firm skeptic about the ghost stories other drivers tell over the CB radio or in late-night diner booths. Phantom headlights, vanishing hitchhikers, ghost convoys. I'd heard it all. To me, it was all just the product of too much caffeine and not enough sleep, the brain's way of filling the void of a long, lonely night. A tired mind sees things. It's that simple. Or at least, it was that simple, until I ran low on fuel on a dark, forgotten stretch of Highway 14 in Wyoming, and the road decided to show me that some things aren't so simple at all. The run was as routine as they come, a mixed load, what we call LTL, less than truckload, from the sprawling depot in Cheyenne up to the energy hub of Gillette. It was an overnight haul, the kind I'd done 1,000 times. My plan, etched in my mind and my logbook, was to make a fuel stop at a big, brightly lit 24-hour truck stop in Douglas. It was a reliable place, a beacon of normalcy with clean bathrooms and coffee that didn't taste like battery acid. But the road, as it often does, had other plans. A problem with the paperwork, a misplaced bill of lading, held me up at the depot for the better part of 2 hours. It was a frustrating bureaucratic delay that threw my whole schedule, my whole rhythm off kilter. By the time I finally got my rig pointed north, the sun was long gone, and the vast empty darkness of the Wyoming high plains was settling in. I drove on, the familiar rumble of my engine a comforting constant in the changing circumstances. But as the miles ticked by, I kept a nervous eye on the fuel gauge. The delay meant I was burning more fuel than planned before my stop, and the needle was dropping with an alarming swiftness. I did the mental math, a calculation I've done countless times. Could I make it to Douglas? Maybe. The needle hovered just above the red line, but maybe not. Pushing your luck with fuel is a rookie mistake, a gamble that can leave you stranded, a helpless 80,000-pound roadblock in the middle of nowhere. I'm no rookie. I decided to play it safe, to swallow my pride and start looking for a closer gas station. This is where the problem began. I was in the middle of absolute nowhere. Highway 14 was a thin black ribbon cutting through a vast, dark emptiness. The sky was a starless, overcast sheet of black, and the land on either side of the road was a formless void. The towns marked on my map were little more than dots, names without substance, and there was no guarantee any of them would have a 24-hour station, let alone one that could accommodate a full-sized semi-truck. The modern world, with its sprawling all-night service centers, felt a million miles away. I was in the Old West, a place of immense distances and profound isolation. The needle on the fuel gauge finally gave up its fight and dipped decisively into the red. A moment later, the low fuel warning light blinked on. Its amber glow was a small, insistent beacon of anxiety on my dashboard, a digital heartbeat counting down my remaining miles. All right, I hear you," I muttered to the truck, my voice sounding small and hollow in the cab. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The last thing any trucker wants is to run out of fuel on a lonely highway in the middle of the night. It's not just an inconvenience. It's a dangerous, humiliating ordeal that involves frantic calls, long waits, and the pitying looks of the road service guys who have to come bail you out. A knot of real cold panic began to form in my stomach. I scanned the horizon, my eyes straining, desperately searching for any sign of light, any hint of civilization. There was nothing, just the endless, oppressive darkness. My mind started to race. I pictured myself on the side of the road, the engine sputtering and dying. The sudden, deafening silence, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant speck in an ocean of black. Just as that bleak image was solidifying in my mind, I saw it. Far in the distance, a faint, hazy glow. It was so dim at first that I thought it might be a trick of the eye, a phantom light born of desperation. But it remained, a steady, fuzzy patch of light against the black. As I drove closer, my heart starting to pound with a fragile hope, the glow resolved itself into a single, flickering neon sign. The letters were a pale, sickly red, and some of them seemed to be struggling to stay lit. It read simply, GAS. Below it, hanging from 2 chains, was a smaller, hand-painted sign with a single stark word, open. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me dizzy. My tense shoulders slumped, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The place looked old, ancient even, but it was open and it was there. It was a small, independent station, the kind you don't see much anymore. A relic from a bygone era of 2-lane highways and full-service attendance. It had a single island with 2 old-fashioned pumps under a small, rusted tin awning. The station building itself was a small clapboard structure, its white paint peeling with a single large picture window that glowed with a warm yellow light. It looked like something straight out of a photograph from the 1950s, a forgotten outpost on a forgotten road. I slowed my rig, flicking on my turn signal out of sheer habit, though there was no one behind me to see it. I pulled off the highway, the tires of my Peterbilt crunching loudly on a lot made of loose, dark gravel. It was a tight fit, a space clearly not designed for a modern 70-foot rig, but I was a professional. With a few careful turns, I managed to line my truck up with the diesel pump. I shut off the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, almost shocking. The world was reduced to the low electric hum and intermittent buzz of the station's neon sign, which cast a pale, unsettling reddish light over everything, painting the gravel and the side of my truck in a color that was not quite blood, not quite rust. I sat for a moment, just breathing, letting the relief wash over me. The crisis was averted. As I watched, the door of the station building creaked open and a man emerged from the yellow light within. He was old, so rail-thin he looked like a scarecrow made of sticks and wire. He was wearing a pair of greasy gray overalls over a faded flannel shirt, the uniform of 1,000 gas station attendants from a time before I was born. His face was a road map of deep-set wrinkles, and his eyes, when he lifted his head to look at me, were pale and cloudy, like faded photographs or marbles left out in the sun too long. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots scuffing softly on the gravel as he walked toward my truck. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a slow, single nod, an acknowledgement of my presence that felt both ancient and weary. "Fill her up with diesel?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The old man just nodded again, his expression unchanging, a mask of tired indifference. He took the heavy metal nozzle from the pump. It was a thick, unwieldy thing, not the sleek, plastic-covered nozzles of today, and walked to the side of my truck. With slow, methodical movements, he unscrewed the cap on my fuel tank. The pump itself was an antique. It wasn't a modern digital pump with a bright LCD screen. It was one of those old mechanical ones, a big red metal box with a glass face behind which a row of numbers on little spinning wheels waited to record the flow of fuel. The old man gripped a large lever on the side of the pump and pushed it down. With a loud, solid clunk, the machine came to life. The numbers began to turn with a soft, mechanical whirring sound as the fuel began to flow into my thirsty tank. I swung myself down from the cab, my boots hitting the gravel. I stretched my back, the vertebrae popping in a satisfying chain reaction. And as I stood there under the buzzing red sign, something about the place began to feel off. It wasn't just that it was old, it was the silence. The profound, unnatural silence. There was no traffic on the highway. Not a single car had passed since I'd pulled in. The old man didn't speak, didn't hum, didn't even seem to breathe. The only sounds were the buzzing of the neon sign and the soft, rhythmic whirring of the fuel pump. And there was a strange smell in the air. It wasn't just the sharp, oily tang of diesel. It was something else, something underneath. It was the smell of dust, of dry rot, of decay. It smelled like a room that had been sealed up for 100 years, the smell of time itself turning to powder. I decided to go inside, to grab a coffee and maybe a snack and to pay for the fuel. I needed to break the strange, silent spell of the place. I walked over to the station building and pushed open the door. A small, tarnished brass bell tinkled above my head, a cheerful sound that was immediately swallowed by the thick, dead air inside. The inside was even more strange, a time capsule from a world I'd only seen in movies. The shelves were stocked with products in faded, sun-bleached packaging. There were glass bottles of soda, Coca-Cola in the old, contoured shape, Royal Crown Cola, knee-high orange, Brands of candy bars I hadn't seen since I was a boy, their wrappers brittle and discolored. Clark bars, Zagnuts, Bit-O Honey. Everything, every single item was covered in a thick uniform layer of gray dust. It wasn't the dust of a few days of neglect. It was the deep, settled dust of decades. Behind the counter stood an old, ornate cash register made of brass and steel, the kind with the big, round, typewriter-like keys and a crank on the side. There was no one behind it. The yellow light I had seen from the outside came from a single, bare bulb hanging from a cord in the ceiling, its light weak and tired. A chill, cold and sharp, went down my spine. This wasn't just an old gas station. This was a museum, a tomb, a place where time had stopped and then died. I backed out of the store slowly, my heart starting to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The feeling of relief I'd had just minutes before had evaporated, replaced by a creeping, inexplicable dread. The old man had finished fueling my truck. The mechanical whirring of the pump had stopped. He was just standing there, holding the nozzle, his pale, cloudy eyes fixed on me with an unnerving stillness. "How much do I owe you?" I asked, my voice unsteady, a half-whisper. For the first time he spoke. His voice was a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across dry pavement. It was a voice that seemed to have been unused for a very long time. "No charge," he said. "Fuel's on the house. For travelers." I stared at him, bewildered. "What?" "No, I have to pay you," I insisted, fumbling for my wallet. The idea of taking something for free from this strange, spectral place felt deeply wrong, like accepting a gift from a ghost. "No charge," he repeated, his voice flat and final, allowing no room for argument. He placed the nozzle back on the pump with a soft click, screwed the cap back on my tank with a slow, deliberate turn of his wrist, and then, without another word or glance, he turned and walked slowly back into the station building. The door creaked shut behind him, and the little bell gave another faint, lonely tinkle. I stood there for a moment, completely bewildered, my wallet still in my hand. Free fuel. It made no sense. It was a violation of the fundamental laws of commerce and common sense. But the feeling of wrongness in this place was now a screaming siren in my head. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to leave. The instinct for flight was overwhelming. I scrambled back into my cab, the metal steps cold and slick under my boots. I fired up the engine, the sudden loud roar of the diesel, a violent, welcome intrusion into the dead silence. I didn't bother to check my mirrors. I just wanted to go. I threw the truck into gear and pulled out of the gravel lot, my tires spinning a little as I accelerated hard onto the highway, leaving a cloud of dust and gravel in my wake. I drove for about a mile, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. It was too weird. It had to be a dream. A waking hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. It was the only explanation that made sense. I needed to prove it to myself. I needed to look back and see the station to confirm that it was a real, tangible place, however strange it might be. I glanced in my rearview mirror. The mirror showed me nothing but the dark, empty highway stretching back into the blackness. I blinked, my heart lurching. I must have just missed it. The angle was wrong, or a dip in the road was hiding it. I looked again, harder this time, my eyes scanning the spot where the faint red glow should have been. There was nothing. The spot where the gas station should have been was just empty plains bathed in the pale, indifferent light of the moon which had finally broken through the clouds. The flickering neon sign was gone. The peeling clapboard building was gone. The gravel lot was gone. It was as if the entire place had been erased from the landscape. It was as if it had never existed. I pulled my truck over to the shoulder, the tires biting into the soft dirt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering. "Wheel steady." I looked at my fuel gauge, expecting to see the needle pointing to full. The needle, which had been deep in the red just a few minutes ago, was now pointing right back where it had been before I'd started looking for a station. It hadn't moved at all. The low fuel light was still on, its amber glow mocking me. It was as if the last 20 minutes had never happened. But I knew it had happened. I could still smell the faint cloying scent of dust and decay on my clothes. I could still hear the old man's dry, whispering voice in my head. No charge for travelers. I was running on fumes, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a memory of a place that couldn't possibly exist. The terror of the place itself was now compounded by the very real, practical terror of my situation. I ended up having to make the humiliating call for road service. The dispatcher sounded skeptical when I told him my location. The wait was agonizing. Hours spent sitting in my dark, silent cab, staring out at the empty spot on the horizon where the ghost station had been, questioning my own sanity. When the service truck finally arrived, its flashing yellow lights a beautiful welcome sight. The driver, a young kid with a cheerful face, gave me enough fuel to get me going. As he was packing up his gear, I had to ask. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is there an old gas station back there a few miles? An old-timer place? Red neon sign?" The kid laughed, a loud, easy sound. "An old station on this stretch? Buddy, there hasn't been anything on this piece of road for 50 years. Not since they built the interstate and this highway died. My grandpa used to talk about a place like that, but it was torn down before he was my age. You must have been dreaming." I didn't argue, I just paid him, thanked him, and got back in my truck. I drove to a real, brightly lit modern truck stop, the kind I had always taken for granted. I filled my tank, the digital numbers on the pump a comforting reassurance of reality. I've never told anyone the full story. They'd think I was crazy, that I'd finally spent too many long nights alone on the road. But I know what happened. I stumbled into a place that is out of time, a ghost on the side of the road that appears to weary, desperate travelers. I don't know if it was a warning or a trap, but I know that the fuel it offered wasn't real. It was as spectral as the station itself, and I have a chilling, unshakable feeling that if I had stayed any longer, if I had drunk the coffee or eaten the dusty candy, I might have become just as unreal as that gas station, just another dusty relic on a forgotten shelf, waiting for the next lost traveler on a dark Wyoming night. My name is Monica James. I'm 40 years old, and unlike a lot of drivers who try to ignore the weirdness of the road, I actively seek it out. I'm a folklore junkie. My sleeper cab is lined with books on local legends, cryptozoology, and ghost stories. My podcast queue is filled with tales of the paranormal. I've visited haunted hotels on my downtime and taken detours to see the sites of famous UFO sightings. I've always been a hopeful skeptic. I wanted to believe, but I'd never seen anything I couldn't eventually explain away. I thought of it as a hobby, a way to add a little spice to the endless miles. I never thought the hobby would come looking for me, on a dark road in the shadow of a place they call Devil's Tower. I was hauling a light load of retail goods, which meant my trailer was mostly empty, making my rig feel skittish and light. The route was taking me through the northeast corner of Wyoming at night. As I drove, I was listening to a podcast about one of my favorite legends, the Black Dog. It's a story that appears all over the world, from the British Isles to Latin America. The details change, but the core is always the same. A large spectral black dog with glowing eyes that appears to travelers on lonely roads. It's almost always seen as an omen, a harbinger of death or misfortune. Some stories say if you see it once, you're warned. If you see it twice, your fate is sealed. As the podcast host described the dog's glowing red eyes, I glanced out my window at the landscape. The moon was full, casting a brilliant silvery light that made the plains look like a strange, alien sea. And there on the horizon was the unmistakable silhouette of Devil's Tower. The place itself is steeped in legend, both Native American and modern. The combination of the podcast, the full moon, and the ominous presence of the tower created a perfect spooky atmosphere. I smiled to myself. This was my kind of night. I was so engrossed in the story that I almost missed it. It was standing in the middle of my lane about 200 feet ahead, perfectly illuminated by my headlights. A large black dog. My first reaction was a jolt of adrenaline and a curse. I slammed on the brakes, the truck's air brakes hissing and groaning. An empty trailer makes you prone to jackknifing, and I fought the wheel as the back end of my rig started to slide out. I braced myself for the sickening thud of impact. But there was no impact. The truck shuddered to a halt, angled awkwardly across the highway. I sat there for a second, my heart hammering, and looked at the spot where the dog had been. It was gone. Okay, I whispered to myself, my breath fogging up the cold glass of the window. It ran off. I scared it. I took a deep breath, put the truck in gear, and carefully straightened it out. As I started to roll forward, I scanned the sides of the road, looking for any sign of it. Nothing. The plains were empty. But as I passed the spot where it had been standing, a detail I had registered but not processed slammed into the forefront of my mind. The dog I had seen wasn't just a dog. It was enormous, the size of a calf, with shaggy jet-black fur that seemed to drink the light. And its eyes. In the brief moment before I swerved, I had seen its eyes. They had been glowing. A deep, fiery red, just like in the stories. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold night air, traced its way down my spine. My folklore-loving brain was at war with my rational, professional driver brain. One was screaming that I had just seen the legendary black dog, the omen of death. The other was insisting it was just a large dog, maybe a Newfoundland or a big mutt, and the glowing eyes were just the tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer in a dog's eyes catching my headlights. I chose to believe the rational explanation. It was the only way to stay sane and keep driving. I shook my head, took a sip of cold coffee, and tried to laugh it off. "Monica, you're letting the stories get to you," I said aloud. I drove on, but the atmosphere in the cab had changed. It was no longer fun and spooky, it was tense. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a crouching animal. The familiar rumble of my engine sounded like a low growl. The tower, now closer, seemed to loom over me, a silent stone witness. I had been driving for another 10 minutes, my nerves slowly starting to settle, when I saw it again. It was standing in the exact same spot, the middle of my lane, about 200 feet ahead. The same massive black form, the same glowing red eyes burning like hot coals in the darkness. This time I didn't swerve. I froze. Time seemed to slow down. The rational part of my brain shut down completely, replaced by a primal, ice-cold terror. The podcast I had been listening to echoed in my head. If you see it once, you're warned. If you see it twice, your fate is sealed. The dog didn't move. It just stood there watching me approach. It wasn't scared. It was waiting. Its red eyes were fixed on me, and in their fiery depths, I saw an ancient, malevolent intelligence. This was not an animal. This was something else entirely. I was going to hit it. There was no time to stop. I closed my eyes, a scream catching in my throat. I braced for the impact, for the crunch of bone and the lurch of the truck. Nothing happened. I felt no impact, no thud, no bump. I opened my eyes. The road ahead was empty. I was still driving, my truck still moving at 60 miles per hour. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. It had vanished. It hadn't run off. It had been there one moment and gone the next, as if it were nothing more than a projection on a screen that had been switched off. I started to hyperventilate, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I pulled the truck over to the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I killed the engine and plunged the cab into darkness and silence. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was being watched by those terrible red eyes. Your fate is sealed. The words echoed in my mind. Was I going to die? Was there going to be a crash? A blown tire? A heart attack? I sat in my cab for what felt like an hour, paralyzed by fear, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every creak of the truck cooling down sounded like a footstep. Every whisper of the wind sounded like a growl. Eventually, the terror subsided, replaced by a grim, cold resolve. I was a truck driver. I had a job to do. I couldn't just sit on the side of the road forever waiting for a ghost dog to claim me. If my fate was sealed, then it was sealed, but I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I started the truck, the engine roaring to life like a defiant beast. I pulled back onto the highway, my eyes scanning the road ahead with a feverish intensity. I drove the rest of the way to my destination with every light in my cab on, the radio blasting, my senses on high alert. I didn't see the dog again. I delivered my load and started my next run. Days turned into weeks. I was jumpy, paranoid, constantly checking my mirrors, my heart leaping at the sight of any animal on the roadside. But nothing happened. There was no crash, no accident, no misfortune. Life just went on. I stopped listening to my paranormal podcasts. I packed away my books on folklore. The hobby was no longer fun. The spice had become a poison. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back at me with glowing red eyes. I still don't know what to believe. Was it a hallucination brought on by the power of suggestion? Or did I really see the legendary black dog on that lonely Wyoming road? And if I did, what did it mean? The old stories say it's an omen of death. But I'm still here. I'm still driving, still hauling, still living. Then, a few months after the incident, I was talking to an old Lakota driver at a truck stop in Nebraska. I vaguely described what I had seen without mentioning the folklore, just a strange black dog near the tower. He looked at me with his dark, knowing eyes and nodded slowly. "That is not a dog," he said, his voice low and serious. "That is Shunka Sapa. He is a messenger, a guardian. He does not always mean a death of the body. Sometimes he appears to mark the death of a path you are on. He is a warning to change your way before a darker fate finds you." His words hit me harder than any ghost story. The death of a path. I had been a seeker of cheap thrills, a tourist in the world of the supernatural. I treated the sacred and the strange as a form of entertainment. Maybe that was the path that had to die. I still drive the lonely roads. I'm still a trucker. But I'm no longer a hopeful skeptic. I'm a believer now. I believe there are things in the darkness that are older and more powerful than our understanding. And I believe that when they send you a message, you'd better listen. I saw the black dog twice and lived. I don't ever want to find out what happens if I see it a third time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know in the comments. Which one chilled you the most? Don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to Horror Whispers for more terrifying tales.